You should stop demonizing liberals. That's what Malay ethno-nationalists are doing. It's a code word for non-Malays. Don't be part of the chorus that's demonizing us. Try and understand the subtext and nuances of political discourse of the country you purportedly want to save. Well, this is a disingenuous take and frankly another case of gaslighting that I'm so accustomed to by liberals. Yeah. First of all, I am not referring, and they know, I am not referring to every single person in society who may have some misguided liberal ideological views. When I say liberal, I'm referring to a specific political player who is at odds with the socialists and who go out of their way to ankle bite the socialists because they try to promote their vision of the Singapore model. Hello and good morning and welcome back to the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur. I hope you're having an amazing day, because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. And if I'm having an amazing day, you should be having an amazing day. Today I'm at the Botanical Gardens, the oldest public park in all of KL, which was actually established by the British to replicate the appearance of a park in the UK. Now, the Botanical Gardens is a fairly large park. People like to come here to go walking around, jogging, and just escaping the hustle and bustle of Kuala Lumpur city life. So, I'm going to put a link in the description as to what the Botanical Gardens is and how you can visit the Botanical Gardens if you visit KL. Now, without further ado, let's begin. Now, for most Malaysians, the word leftist and liberal are often used interchangeably, even though there's quite a stark difference in their definitions. However, it's understandable that most Malaysians often use the word liberal, even right-wing, far right-wing Malaysians use the word liberal in order to refer to leftists, or even lump in communists with liberals or socialists with liberals, because we don't really have much literacy in the political compass. But most people with some inkling of literacy in the political compass make a distinction between leftist and liberal. Basically, liberals support capitalism and they support the preservation of class society, while leftists oppose capitalism and they oppose class society. So, naturally, within the Marxist and socialist group, and even the anarchist group, anybody who is against capitalism, there's always been a certain hostility towards liberals, because we view liberals as the fake left, or the people who call themselves left-wing, but who really don't espouse any meaningful left-wing ideas beyond left-wing aesthetics, such as bourgeois feminism or, ethnic minority capitalism, and so on and so forth. So fundamentally, we view liberals as not wanting to upend class society, but rather to carve themselves a comfortable place on the top of the hierarchy. That is the general perception of leftists towards liberals. And that's why you often hear leftists saying that when the revolution comes, the liberals get the gulag as well. Well, there was a particular liberal on my Twitter who was very unhappy with me, a fellow named Dr. Doom. Now, this liberal is a Malaysian liberal who was saying that I shouldn't demonize liberals, and that apparently this demonization of liberals is basically the same sort of thing that far-right ethno-nationalists in Malaysia are doing, basically. So apparently, I'm supposed to have more in common with a liberal than an Islamist. And that is a common grievance that liberals have towards socialists and leftists. Why do we go after them so much? Why do we criticize them so much? they wonder. They say, don't you have more in common with us, even though we may disagree on economics? We agree on LGBT rights, women's rights, and, gay rights and trans rights. So, by right, you should be on our side. But then the liberals wonder why we're not on their side. Why do we go after liberals more often? And my answer to that question is because the liberal will say that, look, the only difference between the two of us is really that we support capitalism and you don't. But aside from that, when it comes to the cultural issues, when it comes to the ideological issues, we're aligned. We are also on the left, they say, even though they support capitalism. Because, well, we support LGBT rights, we support women's rights, and of course we support minority rights in Malaysia. So doesn't that make us left-wing? Well, I don't think that the liberals really understand what left-wing and right-wing mean in a historical materialist sense. Because they think that as long as they support LGBT rights, as long as they support fair and equal treatment for minorities under capitalism, of course, and they support girl boss feminism, that must make them left-wing. Nothing could be further from the truth. What makes you left-wing or right-wing in a political sense is not your attitude towards social issues per se. Now, granted, I'll be the first to acknowledge that capitalism and anti-LGBT policy are linked, because the preservation of the monogamous family unit under bourgeois society is what causes the passing down of capital from one generation to the next. No one is denying that. But fundamentally, whether you are progressive on social issues like women's rights, LGBT rights, or what have you, minority rights, it says nothing as to whether you are politically left-wing or right-wing. Because what makes you politically left-wing is whether you challenge the current power structure or whether you uphold the current power structure. And from our experience with liberals, and this is my experience with liberals in over a decade of dealing with liberals, liberals uphold the current capitalist imperialist power structure. I'll just give you an example. Okay, no matter which part of the world you come from, one common denominator of liberals, whether that be Drew Pavlou or Brianna Wu or even Bernie Sanders, the nice liberal, is support for Israel. Now, even if they may disapprove of some of Israel's policies, let's say they don't approve, for example, of the fact that Israel is making itself look bad with its explicitly racist and genocidal attitude towards Palestinians. Okay, maybe they may personally disapprove of some of its policies. The fact of the matter is that they still support Israel's right to exist and Israel's right to exist as a Jewish majority state, when in fact ethno-states are a reactionary thing of the past. In fact, the fact of the matter is that Israel itself was formed as a reactionary answer to the so-called Jewish question by people like Churchill, who feared the rise of Jewish Bolshevism in Europe because they thought that communism was a Jewish ideology, believe it or not. Yes, so they thought, we can kill two birds with one stone. We can create satellites in the Middle East with the people that we hate. And we can also send them as far away from Europe as possible. And let them be the problem of the Arabs, right? So, fundamentally, this is the foundational story of Israel. I'm sure most liberals are smart enough to realize that. But they still support Israel. Why? They support it because it has more progressive policies towards LGBT and towards women's rights than countries they deem to be backward and uncivilized. And so I will never forget October 7, 2023, last year, when Malaysian liberals were all chanting in direct or in indirect terms their support for Israel. Or rather, they were more angry at Hamas rather than angry at the Israeli occupation, which has been 80 years, almost 80 years of hell for the Palestinians. Yes, they were more angry at Hamas, the way Hamas was retaliating after almost 80 years of frustration at the brutal occupation policies of Israel. Because liberals, fundamentally, even if they happen to be left liberals, like Bernie Sanders, for example, will stop short of supporting a full revolution or a revolution if it contradicts their civility politics. And the reason we go after them a lot more than we go after the explicit right-wingers is because explicit right-wingers don't hide. Explicit right-wingers show you who they are, while liberals are infiltrating the left and pretending to be one of us, while they are in fact on the same side as any garden variety Republican when capitalism is concerned, or when hatred for the poor is concerned, or whether support for Israel is concerned. I will elaborate on that a little bit more. The reason why we don't go after explicit right-wingers is because explicit right-wingers don't hide who they are. They are like a wolf that wants to eat you, while the liberal is like a snake in the grass. It's gonna camouflage himself among you. But it's really, in fact, the politically correct branch of capital. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that I have come to the regrettable conclusion that the NEGRO's stumbling block is not the explicit member of the Ku Klux Klan, but the white moderate who is more committed to order rather than justice. And that is fundamentally the liberals' policy on oppressed nations that are suffering under the yoke of imperialism. Fundamentally, these nations have a right to defend themselves, but they have a right to do it in a civilized way. So liberals who don't explicitly support Israel, who are not totally in support of them, like in terms of like Bernie Sanders sort of liberal, they will still basically ankle bite revolutionary movements in Palestine, just because those revolutionary movements do not fit within the political correctness of their HR departments. They say, wait for a moderate Palestinian movement to rise up. Then we can support that. As a matter of fact, Hamas is to the left wing of those liberals. Because yes, while Hamas may not be fans of communists, they may not be fans of LGBT, and their track record on women's rights is questionable. The fact of the matter is that, as I've mentioned, whether you are left-wing or right-wing is not necessarily whether you agree with progressive social politics, but rather whether you challenge the explicit or the existing power structures or you aid them. In this regard, the Shah, no, not Shah, sorry, they got rid of the Shah. The leader of Iran is actually more left-wing than the average American or British liberal, because they are challenging the imperialist capitalist power structures, even if they may not be communist or they may not be progressive on social issues, you see. Same goes for Hamas. But that's not how liberals think about it, you see. So I made a couple of videos further elaborating on this topic on Malaysian liberals and Israel, and you can check them out. And in a nutshell, basically, I was talking about how Malaysian liberals were basically ankle-biting the Palestine liberation movement and how they were advertently or inadvertently supporting Israel because they don't like the aesthetics of Palestine. So check those videos out. But the main issue that I have about liberals is not their support for Israel, but it's their rugged individualist mentality, their inability to analyze things from a class analysis, and the fact that if you take away the cultural issues, you take away LGBT, women's rights, or minority rights, well, then what you have is someone who is no different from any garden variety American Republican like Thomas Sowell. Because I know that Republicans have a reputation for hating the poor, and that reputation is not unfounded. It's not an unjustifiable reputation. But at the same time, liberals often fall between the cracks because they only explicitly hate certain types of poor people, like poor white people or poor Malay people. You see, poor people who are in the majority, who have supposedly got more political power. I know the socialists like to say that when you scratch a liberal, a fascist bleeds. And that's actually not hyperbole, because liberals, if they had to choose between communism or fascism, have proven throughout history to always side with fascism rather than communism. Because at least fascism, if they play their cards right, will not threaten capital. Because liberals are more afraid at the loss of their so-called personal freedoms and their so-called right to private property than they are of fascism. Yes, the German liberals were happy to hop on board with Hitler. Yes, you can check out Hakim's video. Or you can even see how liberals in America, like Kamala Harris, for example, or Hillary Clinton, are happy to support imperialist conquest for empire just because it protects their own moneyed private interests, you see. The other day, I cheesed off a Malaysian liberal. Well, as they say, scratch a liberal, a fascist bleeds. And I really cheesed him off. He is a Malaysian liberal on Twitter who calls himself Dizzy R69. Now, this liberal has all the makings of the quintessential Malaysian liberal. And the quintessential Malaysian liberal can really be identified by having three main characteristics. Number one, of course, support for LGBT. Number two, be in his bonnet about Islam. And number three, contempt for certain types of poor people in this country, right? So this Dizzy R69 guy was very angry with me because I criticized him. I criticized him by calling him arrogant because he was basically treating the 4 non-Malay Harvard kids as the revolutionary subject, and he was using it to punch down on poor Malays. And basically, I called him arrogant. I told him it was such an arrogant take. What has the average working class person from the Malay community done to you? I told him that. Well, he wasn't very happy with me, so I'm going to show you our conversation. And then you can see, after a little bit of poking, how the liberals' true reactionaries' colors really come up. Here we go. So I criticized him by saying, this is such an arrogant take. So 4 outstanding students of ours happened to get into Harvard University. 4 of them happened to be of ethnic minority background. Is there a need to attack the Malays? What has the average Malay working class person done to you exactly? Not an attack on the average Malay, unless you're saying that those who firebombed the 3 outlets were from the average Malay working class? On the same note, what has the average American working class done to you exactly? I see that you proudly proclaim yourself as anti-American. Well, let's revisit your statement. We minorities focus on hard work and dedication. Can we also not say the same of many Malays who are also kind and hard-working people? You specified minorities as having this quality. I said America the country, not American the people, or even any particular race in America. So this clown can dish out his anti-American rhetoric, putting 280 million people in one basket because of semantics, but suddenly turns into a white knight to harvest likes from his followers. Yeah, eat my ass, commie scum. Your kind killed thousands of the Malays you pretend to defend. I never virtue signal about how we minorities are better than the majority, as you seemed to be insinuating here. I don't know why you couldn't just be happy for those 4 students and had to bring race into it. Education is very much about race in this country, you ignorant dumbfuck idealist. When the cards are stacked against a group via quotas, budget, infrastructure, discrimination, it will always be about race when one achieves something against the odds. Suppose there were 1 Chinese, 1 Indian, and 1 Malay. What would your response be? Ah, so you saw there were no Malays in this cohort, and you were delighted at the chance to virtue signal about minority greatness. This isn't helping to improve Malaysia. Whataboutism is the weakest form of argument. Yes, indeed, I am delighted that they persevered against state-sanctioned discrimination in education and came out triumphant. Continue eating my ass, commie scum. So you see, the thing about liberals is that they uphold these 4 Harvard kids, who studied hard, no doubt, as the revolutionary subject, just because they come from a non-Malay background, right? They're supposed to be underprivileged minorities. Apparently more underprivileged than Malay kids in the rural areas taking boats to school because they happen to be non-Malay, right? Yeah, that's the liberal analysis. Let me keep this simple for you. My grandpa risked his life to fight against you shit-staring, bloodthirsty commie scum. In fact, he even killed a handful of you in battle. What Grandpa did, grandson will happily emulate if he sees the rise of red imperialists in this land again. Ooh, I'm trembling in fear. Okay, Ronald Reagan, look, if you say your grandfather fought the commies in the British times, that's not exactly the flex that you think it is. No, it's an admission that your grandfather was a Talibarut who fought on the side of the British Army. Yeah. Save your YouTube channel for someone who cares. Jinping, the only person's grave I would happily piss on. I see the resemblance in both your fugly faces, though. Ever notice that the most eager socialists and commies are those that tried but did not and could not make it in life? You don't see successful people being this way. Only the B40s and M40s. Oh yeah, liberals not disproving their hatred for the poor allegations here. B40s means bottom 40 percentile and M40s means mid 40 percentile of society. They failed now, so now they want intervention to make up for their failures. Yeah, I'm not convinced that liberals do not hate the poor, and he's not exactly helping me to see a different point of view. Or, in other words, he's not exactly disproving my inkling that liberals do not like the poor, and they certainly don't like the working class. So recently, Dizzy, the nutty liberal Malaysian, visited my channel again. The man has an obsession with me. Well, let's see what he has to say today. Shut the fuck up, commie! Stop trying to penalize decent, hardworking people. Go fix your own backyard. Well, I am fixing my own backyard. We live in Malaysia, don't we? But of course, you are trying to run away like the pusillanimous coward you are. Look at the top 3 richest world leaders. They're all stinking commies. Equity distribution, my liberal ass. Ugh. Do liberals have some kind of juvenile understanding of communism or socialism? It has never been about the equal distribution of wealth. That's a bourgeois idealism. Good God. You know, for people who claim to be very smart, very clever, and very educated, liberals don't seem to have a basic grasp of what Marxism really is. So I say, penalize decent, hard-working people, as if capitalism doesn't already do that. Equal distribution of wealth, a bourgeois ideal not feasible in reality. And no, communism is not about fetishizing poverty. It's about deserving workers getting the wealth they deserve. Reactionaries bring up rich commies as some kind of a gotcha. There's no rule which states communists have to be poor. You can't lead a movement if you're barely scraping by. Engels was a wealthy man. Socialism is not poverty. To be rich is glorious. That's what Deng Xiaoping said. Funny how this commie shot himself on the foot, using Engels, who inherited his wealth from his father's textile business, as an argument against inheritance. You can't make this shit up. Engels was a class traitor who used his dad's ill-gotten gains to finance the revolution and see the common people advance. Under the current system, of course, no communist is calling for abolishing inheritance. Only when communism has been achieved will it become superfluous. If it ever does get it achieved in this country. I'm not holding my breath. And this overfed Malaysian fat boy here is trying to spread his propaganda on a platform owned by the richest man. I'm not fat, actually. I'm rather lithe and rather athletic, so I don't know how he came to the conclusion that I was fat. Maybe in my videos the camera angles aren't always the best, and sometimes I have the illusion of a double chin because of my Asian baby face. But the reality is I'm really not fat. This is basically ad hominem to try and throw me off course. Marx used paper and pens which were produced by capitalists in order to write Das Kapital. Therefore, he was a hypocrite who should not have taken advantage of whatever means he had at his disposal. I am very smart. Looks like you had a lot of food at your disposal too, fat boy. That's a very, very intelligent liberal argument there. Yes, liberals are the cream of the crop of Malaysian academic achievement, as we can see. Yes, such intellectual vigor in his arguments. Seems this fascist Gusano is leaving Malaysia. Oh good, we don't need racist, elitist trash like him in our society, because when he says type M, he means Malay, right? And he always keeps shitting on poor Malays. You know, if Malaysia does actually become a socialist country, this motherfucker will be one of those Cuban victims of socialism in USA. Yeah, he's gonna be like one of those victims of socialism. Because you know how it is that the imperial core is where the reactionaries of the world tend to unite? So working class people who move to the imperial core move out of necessity. But there's a strata of elite white-collar intelligentsia from the global south who were oppressing their own people in their own countries who moved to the imperial core as well. Usually this will be the liberal elite strata of the reactionary intelligentsia who, basically are those who are assisting and facilitating in the oppression of their own people back in the global south. That's why I say reactionaries of the world unite when I talk about America. Sorry we couldn't get to his grandfather before he had children. Well, yeah, this guy is basically a bad seed, born out of bad blood, basically. Sad. Like grandfather, like grandson. The world is forever tainted by their family. My granddad was a champ. He slaughtered a bunch of you with his favorite machete. They did try to get to him, but ended up in shallow graves. I wish I knew where they were buried, so I could go and piss on it. And liberals are saying that I dehumanize them. Yeah, they're saying that I demonize them when liberals are demons. Yeah, that was a very, very productive discussion, don't you think? We really had a dialectical exchange of intellectual views. It was a most productive Socratic dialogue, wasn't it? Yes. So you see, after poking the lipshit a little bit, very soon his fascist stripes come out. And very soon he makes it clear his intention to do to you what his grandfather did to Chin Peng's men. Yes, very soon the liberals' fascist stripes come right out. When you poke them a little bit, you scratch them a little bit, and then you can see what color they bleed. Now you might be surprised, but liberals, even like this fellow, consider themselves to be the righteous defenders of justice and equality. But their version of equality is the bourgeois ideal of equality, meaning that everyone, whether you're born in a rich family or poor family, it doesn't matter, everyone has an equal opportunity to compete in life and an equal opportunity to rise. And if you are poor, that means you have failed, and it is a character failing on your part. So in that regard, they have no difference between, there's no difference between them and a Republican like Thomas Sowell. The only difference is that the American Republican is a little bit more honest. The American Republican doesn't pretend to be on the left wing, you see. And don't be surprised when you see Malaysian liberals left, right and center, especially of the Malaysia Kini or Our Malaysia type, actually quoting, unironically quoting Thomas Sowell. Yes, like the time when Siti Kasim, the Malaysian liberal, who's supposed to be about peace and love and justice for all, started quoting Thomas Sowell to moralize to the Palestinians because she didn't like their aesthetics and she didn't like their manner of rebellion. No. Liberals have no problem, as I've mentioned, siding with fascists. And when it comes to choosing left-wing figures or right-wing figures to emulate, the liberals will inadvertently choose the latter rather than the former. Because liberals don't like to be seen as right-wing. They don't like to be seen as stuffy and fuddy-duddy and old-fashioned. They want to be seen as hip and cool and progressive, but at the same time they don't want to be associated with commies or socialists because they still want to keep their class position. You see, liberals are different from Republicans. They don't hate the poor, they just hate the poor differently. They don't hate poor people of all colors, they just hate poor white men. In the same way, Malaysian liberals don't hate all poor people, they only hate poor Malay men. What we don't like about liberalism is fundamentally that it positions itself as a left-wing ideology, or it's people who call themselves liberals like to call themselves part of the left. But as I've mentioned, they are no less classist or elitist or contemptuous of the masses than any garden variety American Republican. It's just that they're better at hiding this fact by couching their reactionary politics under the guise of social justice. For example, if they support Israel, they do it because Israel is progressive on LGBT or progressive on women's rights. If they want to bash down on poor people, they bash down on poor white people or poor Malay people. So they bash down on the so-called dominant majority. That is the dialectic of the liberal, basically. Basically, a man who wants to be elitist and who wants to hate on the masses and who wants to distinguish themselves from the common herd of men, but at the same time also wants to distinguish themselves from a stuffy, explicit right-winger. And if you ask most Malaysian liberals, in fact ask virtually every single Malaysian liberal, what is your ideal society at the end of if the current base gets upended? Well, they'll tell you they want the Singapore system. They'll tell you that the socialist system is unfeasible and it will reward undeserving people, you know. And there are some liberals in Malaysia, in fact many liberals, who even think that we are currently living in socialism now, but socialism for the Malays. That's what they're saying. So liberals are fundamentally dangerous towards mass organization because they fundamentally dampen the revolutionary spirit of the people, and they create a feeling of distrust among different groups. Yes, with their identity politics. I made a video about identity politics a few days ago, and I'll get you to check that one out. And I explain why the liberal injection of identity politics in the class struggle ends up dividing the workers of different genders, different races, or different religions. But the fact of the matter is that liberals don't want a revolution. They don't want a seismic change that will shift the arrangement of society. They don't want that. They want to reform society to better suit their own convenience. That is fundamentally what they are. So they want the Singapore system not because they actually care about the poor Chinese or Indians who are being sidelined by Bumiputra affirmative action policies. Yeah, I made a couple of tweets on those. Go look that up. I will do another video on the Bumiputra policies, but that's a different topic for another day. Liberals don't care about poor people who are being sidelined by these policies. No, what they care is about basically punishing groups that they feel have wronged them or have slighted them, right? They feel slighted by certain groups, whether that be white people or Malays or what have you. They feel slighted. So their intention or their ideal society is not done with the intention of worker unity and poverty alleviation and the end of class society, but rather their ideal society is a society that is, you know, more meritocratic, which is basically code word for basically them deciding what is meritorious, right? But it's not a society where we overthrow the capitalist power structures and let the proletariat or facilitate the proletariat in playing their historical role, which is to seize political power from the bourgeoisie. No, because liberals do not support that, because that would go against their class position, you see. Now take a liberal demagogue like James Chin, for example, who is a professor of Asian Studies at Tasmania University. Well, no surprise, because the most reactionary sort of Asians actually go over to the West and serve their academic institutions, don't they? Well, take this fellow for example. Now, this fellow has a bee in his bonnet about Malaysia. He cannot stop talking about Malaysia. And he cannot stop talking about how Malaysia is a failed state. Malaysia has no hope. Malaysia cannot be like Singapore, which is supposed to be the gold standard for the liberal, even though Singapore is a classist, elitist, capitalist dystopia, right? James Chin recently made a tweet about how the overwhelming majority of young Malays do not support racial equality because they are in favor of Bumiputra affirmative action policies. Now, do I think that race-based affirmative action should go? Yes, of course. But the liberals disingenuously maintain that people like me are serving the power structures of Malaysia because we don't criticize the government enough. But I have maintained that the race-based affirmative action policies are started out with good intentions, because at the time they were created, they were meant to level out the playing field between the Malays who had been thrust from feudalism straight to capitalism, and the Chinese, who had already 50 years of capitalism experience under their belts because they'd been proletized half a century earlier, right? So the Malay leadership were concerned that without these policies, that the Malays would fall to the wayside and they would suffer under the new capitalist system, subsumed by the Chinese. So these affirmative action policies were created. But what happened was they created a class of elite bourgeois Malays who end up reproducing their class position by taking advantage of them, even though they don't have to. Like, why does a Tan Sri's son need affirmative action when he has the best school and the best tutors? That's a given. So the liberals are disingenuous in saying that I don't want an end to affirmative action. But the reason why I want an end to race-based affirmative action is because naturally I want affirmative action to be class-based. And the liberals have a very different take on it. From the liberals' perspective, they want an end to racial affirmative action because they want everybody to be competing fairly in a dog-eat-dog capitalist dystopia like Singapore. I want an end to race-based affirmative action, and I want it to be replaced by a socialist system where we cooperate rather than compete. We are not the same, yeah? So don't pretend that we are the same. When the liberal says they want to abolish race-based affirmative action, they're not doing it with the intention for poverty alleviation. They want to give the Malays their just desserts. That's what they want. It's not because they want poverty alleviation. It's not because they care about the plight of poor or working class minorities who are being sidelined by these policies. Because if they did, they would already become socialists by now, wouldn't they? But they're not. Because they still want to defend the current capitalist mode of production. Because they benefit from the current capitalist mode of production. That's why it's so typical of a Malaysian or Singaporean liberal to critique race-based policy in Malaysia, but at the same time not attack capitalism, even though race-based policy has now morphed from a benign policy to help struggling Malays in the rural areas, and there are still many of them in the rural areas who are struggling. It is morphed from that to becoming something that basically widens the gap between a certain strata of people and the rest of us, right? But instead the liberals, and now it's being used as part of the superstructure to keep the capitalist base on life support, because it breeds distrust and resentment in certain members of the working class who feel they don't benefit from these policies. But the liberals, of course, if you could tell the liberals, you know what, want to end race-based politics in this country? Okay, let's move to the socialist mode of production and race-based politics will naturally wither away. They will say no, they won't want that, because from their perspective, socialism is a system that rewards undeserving people, even though they have a juvenile understanding of socialism. Okay? But fundamentally, the liberal is reactionary because, as I've said, they are no less classist or elitist or even imperialist than any garden variety American Republican. It's just that they're better at virtue signaling about it. It's no surprise that people like Jordan Peterson and Bill Maher are often described as being classical liberals. And classical liberals are supposed to be the old-fashioned sort of liberal that distinguishes them from the more hip and trendy modern liberal. But fundamentally, Bill Maher and Jordan Peterson are the purest form of liberal. When Bill Maher said, speak for liberal values, talk up for liberal values, such as gay rights, women's rights, and so on, and basically he expresses contempt towards the non-Western world and chauvinism for the Western world, this is the purest form of liberalism. Because liberalism originated in Europe. And the founders of liberalism were 18th century men like John Locke, who were very chauvinistic and very, very, very contemptuous of non-Western people. Yes, John Stuart Mill even said, and I quote, that there are certain types of people, I'm paraphrasing him, but John Stuart Mill said there are certain types of people that need despotism. Democracy is only for the mature people of the world, aka the Westerners. So if you're wondering why liberals not only have a Western chauvinist, but even a contemptuous view of colonized people, this is exactly the ideology that, or this is exactly the sort of thinking that liberalism was supposed to create, as well as the preservation of private property. Because liberalism also believes in private property rights. You know, that's because it fundamentally was the ideology that felt feudalism, right? But it didn't emancipate the working class, because it turned the peasant into a proletarian laborer. Now, the viewer of this video will be forgiven for thinking that I hate liberals. That's not quite true. I don't hate them, but I distrust them. And I don't believe that we should go out of our way to persecute them, but at the same time, we need to always keep an eye on them like a coiled snake. Because, as I've mentioned, while right-wingers are openly hostile, or far right-wingers like ethno-nationalists or white supremacists or Malay supremacists are openly hostile, liberals need to be treated with caution. We don't have to go out of our way to persecute them. If they don't fuck up the revolution, we don't even have to throw them into gulags. We don't have to go out of our way to persecute them as long as they don't screw up the revolution. But knowing them, I'm not so sure whether they won't screw up the revolution. But what I am saying is that we need to keep an eye on them like a coiled snake, and we cannot have solidarity with them. Because the contradictions between us and them are like the contradictions between the slave and the slave master, or the contradictions between the peasant and the feudal lord, or the contradiction between labor and capital. It's an unresolvable contradiction, because fundamentally we do not stand for the same values, and we do not have the same aim on how society is going to be. They want to preserve the status quo, albeit make it more comfortable for their own personal position, while we want to upend the status quo. And that's why we can enter uneasy truces with them from time to time, but we must always be cautious of them. And history has told us that we should always be cautious of them. Okay? So, thank you very much and have a wonderful day. Goodbye.